but there were people running everywhere.
It's like when you panic, you don't think straight anymore.
Like ants, they were running all over the place in every direction you could think of.
For 20 years, the US had guaranteed South Vietnam's existence. Now, with their communist enemies massing at the gates of Saigon, the fear was the US would cut and run.
Your fear take over.
It was palpable fear.
People would be screaming. People would be crying.
You could sense it, feel it, hear it, everywhere you went.
There would be grenade attacks, terrorist attacks in the city. I don't know, maybe you could parallel it to bombings in Baghdad right now.
Those Vietnamese who had supported the US presence in their country had most to fear. America promised to take care of them, whatever happened. But exit strategies are notoriously unreliable.
They say everybody in the whole world know that Saigon, we are going to lose Saigon. But they say within Saigon, it's so people didn't want to believe it. People just still hope that American would not leave us. The Western world would not leave us.
This is the story of what happens when the battle is lost. The 55 days leading to the fall of Saigon. At the end of 1974, the Communist North Vietnamese Army launched an attack on the Republic of South Vietnam. An uneasy truce that had held for nearly 2 years was over. It was the opening gambit in the North's plan for final victory, a campaign to unify the country once and for all. For 20 years, Vietnam had been one of the chief battlegrounds of the Cold War. It was divided into Communist North and US-backed South. Over 1 million American soldiers had fought for 10 years to keep communism out of South Vietnam. But 58,000 American dead became too much to take, and in 1973, Nixon brought the troops home.
Now that we have achieved an honorable agreement, let us be proud that America did not settle for a peace that would have betrayed our allies.
Publicly, America stayed committed to South Vietnam. But from now on, the South would have to do the fighting alone. America would provide the money, weapons, and military expertise. It took the North Vietnamese less than 3 weeks to take the entire province of Phuc Long. Encouraged, the northern commanders now began to plan their assault on the ultimate prize, Saigon. Saigon, capital of South Vietnam, seemed oblivious to the danger ahead. Despite the war, the city had been spared any real fighting for 8 years. For those Americans still stationed there at the beginning of 1975, it represented freedom and good times.
It was fun. We lived like a rich man in a poor country. We made maybe $400 a month, and just to compare that with the Vietnamese, the average Vietnamese secretary would make $30 a month. The average Vietnamese general would make $100 a month. So we were considered very rich. We could have anything we wanted when we were over there. Kind of spoiled us in a way. But it was a lot of fun for a 20, 21-year-old.
Marine Sergeant Doug Patraz arrived in Vietnam in 1974 to be an embassy guard. He got together with a local girl, Hoa, who had a 3-year-old daughter.
You could get a lot of different girls, not just bar girls. There's a lot of girls that were secretaries and worked for different embassies and stuff that you got to know. It's just a matter of money, I guess. And they looked at you as security or maybe a route back to the United States.
If Saigon was ever to fall to the north, there was one group of South Vietnamese who would be in particular danger. Many in Saigon had adopted the American way of life. They worked for American organizations or the American-backed South Vietnamese government. To the communists, they were all collaborators.
I was more American because I was the first one in my family who spoke English.
Kim Luan Hill worked for an American Catholic charity helping the orphans of war. The American occupation had given her opportunities denied to most middle-class Vietnamese girls.
You have to know someone, and only with the American that I got a job to support my family. And the first question was, is that wrong to work for American? I don't think so. I mean, everybody, it's just making money. I wasn't, for me, politics don't play a role in my life at those times.
From the safety of Saigon, the North Vietnamese threat seemed remote.
And I wear miniskirt. I like it. And it was kind of chubby for Vietnamese standard. And so I enjoy it, and then with the skirt I can move. I'm a tomboy. And so with the skirt or with pants or jeans, I can move quicker, I can do things I want, and I ride motorcycle and I race motorcycle with my cousin when I grew up. And so I was just a completely different, so maybe I adopted the Western ideas and stuff because it fit me better. So we are the new group of people that American culture created. I hate to say that, but I'm not ashamed of it.
American forces may have left South Vietnam, but American money was still the key to the country's survival. At the heart of Saigon was the center of American power, the U.S. Embassy.
The Americans were an enormous presence, even with the troops withdrawn. We were a huge embassy. Just about every faction of the U.S. government that had a stake in foreign affairs was involved in the embassy, one way or the other out there.
The embassy was led by Ambassador Graham Martin. A career diplomat, he had previously been ambassador in Bangkok and Rome. Saigon was to be his last post before retirement.
He was tough, he was brilliant, indefatigable, he was total control, wanted it, got it, knew how to use it.
Ambassador Martin certainly had a very incisive, penetrating intellect. Graham Martin could go to the heart of any question or an issue very, very quickly.
On the other hand, you know, there were those of us, I'm one of them, who thought there was a devious quality to him.
Martin went to Vietnam with a mission. He would do everything in his power to ensure that South Vietnam would never fall.
He told me that he was going to go to Vietnam and he did not intend to give the country away to the communists, and that's a view that I could strongly share with him.
It was a hardline embassy. Graham Martin had surrounded himself with people who thought as he did, were true believers in the sense that they were doing the right thing, the country had a chance, and that it was U.S. responsibility to see to it that the country got every additional chance that could be given. It was an emotional / intellectual belief system that believed that we could rebuild a democracy there. Not rebuild, build a democracy there.
Martin's hopes for South Vietnam rested on its president, Nguyen Van Thieu. Thieuy's army was desperately in need of continued US aid if it was to resist an attack from the north. Martin spent a lot of time in Washington, lobbying for funds for South Vietnam. The problem was that Congress, which had to approve the money, saw Thieu and his army as weak and corrupt. Martin sent a cable to the White House, expressing his frustration.
Propaganda by those American puppets of Hanoi in the American press and among American politicians has totally obscured the fact that enormous changes have taken place here in the past year. South Vietnam's forces have matured into an effective military machine, capable of handling the entire range of the capabilities possessed by North Vietnamese forces. Washington is where the trouble is, not Vietnam.
Martin's battle with Congress would now come to a head. A congressional delegation was sent to Saigon. They would decide whether to carry on bankrolling the South. Congressman Pete McCluskey was a member of the delegation.
This is a major national debate we're going through as to whether or not the United States, faced for the first time in our history without controlling oil prices, we're going to have to contract our exercise of...
Everything I saw in all of our visits there were that the Vietnamese wanted a reunited country. They weren't up to fighting for what America thought was so crucial. They didn't like communism, but they weren't going to fight. And I've always felt that any money that we had given or any more military assistance, tanks, artillery, planes, bombs, none of that would have survived against the North Vietnamese. Any money would have been money down a rat hole.
Martin's deputy and right-hand man was Wolfgang Lehmann. He showed the members of Congress around.
Well, some of the members of Congress were interested solely in embarrassing the South Vietnamese government and embarrassing the American embassy and embarrassing the President of the United States.
The delegation encountered a siege mentality at the embassy.
I thought it was an unreal world in that embassy. Magnetized by the ambassador's leadership or the demands on his part that they all tell the same story, you had an embassy that was cowed into accepting this sense of unreality.
They had already made up their minds. They had already made up their minds that they didn't want to do anything. Their conduct could be best termed as having been obscene.
They were trying to convince us to get the Congress of the United States to send more money to Vietnam, that Vietnam was really a good government and succeeding. And it's not wholly unlike what our government has been saying to us about Iraq recently. You always get government people refusing to face the real truth if it's embarrassing to what the administration wants to do.
McCluskey's delegation returned to Washington, and Congress delivered its verdict. There would be no further increase in aid to South Vietnam. It was a financial and psychological blow to the Saigon regime. Martin and his team were furious.
Frankly, I had personally had not expected much better. But still, you know, it made us feel pretty badly. And it certainly demoralized the South Vietnamese.
Now the North Vietnamese commanders saw their chance. They launched another attack. This time, they planned to go all the way to Saigon. First, they struck at the provincial capital of Ban Ma Thuot. Demoralized South Vietnamese troops offered little resistance. To head off further defeat on the battlefield, Thieu gambled. He ordered his troops to abandon the Central Highlands. He was giving up 6 provinces to the North Vietnamese without a shot being fired. His calculation was he could use the troops to reinforce the defense of Saigon.
It was far from being a glorious moment. This armoured spearhead of officers, men and their families had abandoned the rest of the convoy of 150,000 civilians. They were supposed to lead convoy Bravo 7 to safety, but the plan was ignored when the communist forces blockaded the road 15 miles from here. It was certainly not a case of women and children first, gallant soldiers last.
Martin's confidence in the South Vietnamese army was not borne out. Army officers were the first to run, followed by their men, and finally, tens of thousands of civilians. Many of them were killed in North Vietnamese ambushes along what was to become known as the Convoy of Tears. Thieu's gamble to abandon the Central Highlands had taken his allies completely by surprise.
Ils ont pris la décision, M. Thieu a pris la décision, sans en informer les Américains au préalable. Et c'est moi, bizarrement, qui ai informé l'ambassadeur des États-Unis de cette décision que M. Thieu m'avait raconté le plus naturellement du monde. Il m'a raconté, il m'a dit voilà, nous allons évacuer. Et nous allons nous rassembler autour de Saigon. Et alors il se trouve que quelques heures après, j'ai rencontré M. Martin, par hasard, enfin, et je lui ai dit à propos, donc vous savez, les sudistes enfin, sont en train d'évacuer les plateaux. Et alors là, il a blêmé, il m'a dit c'est pas possible. Je lui ai dit écoutez, c'est ce que m'a dit le président, maintenant vous êtes a priori mieux informé que moi du mouvement de l'armée vietnamienne. Il ne le savait pas.
The North Vietnamese now headed for the coast, threatening to split South Vietnam in 2. Hundreds of thousands of refugees flooded into the coastal cities of Nha Trang and Da Nang.
And at that time, I still remember that all the school had to be opened up for the refugee to come. So we see a lot of refugees everywhere coming from, all the city from the north.
Long's family were anti-communist Catholics who had once lived in the north. They brought their children up with tales of communist horrors.
What I worry most is that they're going to kill my parents because they escaped the north. And then they kill me because I'm their family. I would fear that they would burn down all the church and all of my school because, we're not communist. The most extreme case is that they would bury you to the neck and they would kill you after that.
The rumors of communist reprisals spread through Da Nang, South Vietnam's second largest city. With the North Vietnamese now poised to take Da Nang, its frightened citizens became desperate to get out.
It was chaos. Everybody was, trying to figure out how to get out, and of course, the people that had American contacts were all trying to lean to us to see if they could get some help from the U.S. government. It was like a colony of ants that all of a sudden smelled honey. From very, very quiet days and normal days, all of a sudden there were people, little ants running everywhere you could see. Combination of people trying to locate relatives, trying to find out ways to get out of the country, trying to salvage household goods as much as they could, which ones could they pack and take out. There's a whole combination of reasons for people to be moving back and forth in various parts of the city.
My mom asked me to go buy a ticket for the family to go to Saigon. And I remember to go buy a ticket, I had to fight my way through a lot of people to get to the counter. But we're lucky enough to buy enough ticket for my mom and a bunch of us to go to Saigon.
Long and his family left for Saigon. They were among the lucky ones. By the end of March, North Vietnamese troops had surrounded Da Nang. All commercial flights out of the city had stopped. Refugees were thought to be hiding at the airport. A mercy mission was sent from Saigon in the hope of rescuing women and children. Those on board had no idea what they were flying into.
It was deserted. The entire base was like a ghost airport. It was the weirdest, and that's a really busy airport. And there was just nobody. And then suddenly out of the revetments where they stored military aircraft came thousands. I mean, it was like a horde of ants or bees coming out of a beehive. A few women, but basically all of them were soldiers that wanted out.
As soon as the rear stairway was lowered, the stampede of terrorized people tried to storm the plane. From the cockpit, the pilots reported by radio that the situation was out of control.
If you were one about to get on the steps, you were lucky to make it up the steps of the aircraft, because the guys behind were shooting, and they were shooting to kill. They were knocking women and children aside. They were using their butt of the rifle. It was chaos, absolute, total chaos.
Several times the pilots moved the plane, hoping to break the crowds around the rear ladder. There was no control. High-ranking officers in Da Nang have fled, leaving soldiers and airmen to fend for themselves. The stewardesses dragged people on and rushed them to seats, screaming all the while, "Where are the women and children?" They piled 4, 5, and 6...
That is when the aircraft started to move. I know we ran over people, because you could hear the screams.
Angry men left behind fired pistols and automatic weapons at the plane, determined that no one would go if they couldn't. As the plane strained laboriously into the air, people were still clinging to the wheels and the rear stairs. 7 men fell off as the plane reached heights of 1,000 feet or more.
I remember this woman, she went off first, and she actually waved to us. It was bizarre. She waved goodbye, doing this, at 3,000 feet. And I don't know that she had any inkling that she was falling to her death.
With the airport closed, the docks now became crowded with Vietnamese civilians trying to get out. But once again, South Vietnamese soldiers would do anything to save themselves.
This ship was half full of the military and half full of civilians. The military were afraid that scattered among the civilians were Viet Cong. So what the military were doing, they were going and they were rounding up all of the young Vietnamese, and they were, in some cases, making them jump over the side of the boat. And in some cases, they shot some of them. The Vietnamese were totally out of control. Our military people were totally out of control.
Among the refugees were hundreds of Vietnamese who worked for the Americans. It was they who were in the greatest danger if captured by the North Vietnamese.
I was the only American left, and I was at the evacuation point with all of these people. So we had all of the aid people that had not been evacuated assembled in a hotel, and it was my job to try and find some kind of transportation to have those people evacuated. I remember that our big boss came in on a helicopter, and the helicopter landed in front of the place where these people were assembled. But I was told to walk to him very slowly, shake his hand, and get on the helicopter, and don't look back, and don't say another word. And I of course balked because I was responsible for these Vietnamese that I knew couldn't get on this helicopter. So I got on the helicopter, and as we got on the helicopter, the helicopter immediately started to leave the ground. I felt terrible because I was responsible for those people, and not only was I responsible, but I personally knew almost all of them from being at the embassy, at the consulate in Da Nang for so long. And I was really, really upset. But I was told by our biggest boss that to get on the helicopter and don't even look back, just get on the helicopter and don't say anything.
Thousands of refugees left behind fought their way onto barges escaping the city. They hoped to reach Saigon, where they thought they would find safety. Crammed onto boats with little food or water, hundreds died making the 3-day journey. The fall of Da Nang had turned into a human catastrophe.
Da Nang was a huge shift in the pendulum in, I think, all of our thinking. Da Nang not only fell, but if you recall, Da Nang fell ingloriously. I mean, that was a hectic evacuation. And I think it set up the great fear back in Saigon of what fear could do to the Vietnamese community.
Da Nang was a terrible warning of what the future might hold for Saigon. But although the North Vietnamese were getting ever closer to the city, Ambassador Martin refused to consider an evacuation.
I didn't see any indication that he was insane, but I would say that he was obsessed with the virtue of his mission beyond the point where he could make competent decisions. I think right up to the very end he was thinking they were going to hold. I don't know when it was that Graham Martin ever reached the conclusion that it was going to fall.
The embassy painted the rosiest picture you could ever imagine. They're fighting well, they're strong, they're courageous, they have the country's interest at hand, and they can turn the North Vietnamese back, and they're in great shape.
A week after the fall of Da Nang, the war came to Saigon. A South Vietnamese pilot defected. He abandoned his mission in midair and bombed the presidential palace.
And about an hour after the bombing of the palace came the imposition of a 24-hour curfew. It was announced on Vietnamese radio and on loudspeakers very noisily in the streets in the center of Saigon itself. When the announcement came, people poured out of the shops, the offices, the businesses in the center, and they're now jamming the streets on their way home. It's absolute bedlam.
Washington wanted to know the mood of the city, but official embassy reports only gave the good news.
I got a phone call at my villa one night from State Department. They said, look, we don't trust the reporting coming out. would you please send us separately a telegram describing what you see as the psychological atmosphere there on the ground, in the embassy and out on the streets. And I said, I'll do it. I'll file it through my USIA channel. I said, but 24 hours, Graham will have read it, and that'll be the last one you're going to get out of me, only because he will have stopped me. We need that. So I filed it. The last line, as I recall it, of the cable was indicative of all that preceded it in the cable. There is fear out there bordering on panic.
Out in the country, the North Vietnamese advance continued to within 30 miles of Saigon. Thousands of refugees came flooding into the city. They brought with them tales of atrocities committed by bloodthirsty communists.
The rumors at that time was, okay, they are coming in and they rape, and I heard that there's where rape happened, that they would pull out the fingernails of women that who have their nail painted, and that they would executed people that who work for the Americans.
In spite of the rumors, Kim stayed at her post. She had absolute faith in the Americans.
I am surrounded by my American friend who keeps saying to me that we would never leave you and the U.S. government would never leave you. We will stay here with you until the end. They believed that Saigon would not fall, and if it fall, it would be a long time. But no one ever discussed like the possibility that the American would drop us. I think they're afraid to bring it up to us too, because there was fear that they would cause chaos in their company. People would flee them. All of these, of course, they may be, I didn't know then, but maybe they was under the pressure not to say anything that would cause panic, because they was constantly assuring us, you will leave with us if it happened. But the fall of Saigon won't happen so quickly.
The Americans were haunted by the events at Da Nang. If the same panic engulfed Saigon, it would be many times worse. Publicly, the embassy encouraged the view that no Vietnamese need leave Saigon.
One of the principal things that we had to do was to avoid doing anything that might create a panic and therefore make it impossible for us to go ahead with evacuating either Americans or, for that matter, Vietnamese. So the governing principle was, yes, do things in time, but do not do them too quickly, not too soon.
But many Americans and some Vietnamese with money or the right connections were now leaving the city on commercial flights. Sensing the Americans might abandon them, fear began to take hold of the streets of Saigon.
I would get back to my villa late at night or whenever, and there would be 15, 20, 25 people outside the gate. They come in and, you know, you're the minister for this, and we've been loyal to the U.S., we're in sensitive positions, please get me and my family out. And you would say, we can't. And they would fall sometimes to their knees. And when I use the word grovel, I mean that's what they did. And they would say, never mind me, get my wife, my children, my mother, my father out, please. I think it's the worst thing emotionally that I've ever encountered. As an adult, dealing with other adults who thought you were some kind of a power bastion that could save them from one of their worst fears. They saw us as what we were, the power. They knew we were the power behind whatever government was then in office. and the next one and the one after that. They knew that we were the financial providers, if you will, of the economy, and they knew we were powerful. I can think of no other episode during what was for me the worst 9 months of my government career, for a lot of reasons, not just the eventual outcome. I can think of nothing that hit me with the wallop that did.
Pressure was growing from Washington to begin an evacuation. A North Vietnamese victory was now looking inevitable, and they wanted all Americans out of Saigon. But Martin was still resisting an evacuation. He cabled the White House, warning them that angry South Vietnamese would turn on the Americans for abandoning them.
One thing that would set off violence would be a sudden order for an American evacuation. Of one thing I am certain, deadly certain. If U.S. armed forces come in here, they will be fighting the South Vietnamese on the way out.
But Martin may have had personal reasons for staying. To leave would be to admit defeat to the communists, something he could never accept.
Il avait un fils qui avait été tué pendant la guerre au Vietnam. Et c'était un élément psychologique très important. Et jusque presque au dernier moment, il a cru que la situation pouvait se renverser, et que les choses pouvaient continuer. Et que finalement, la politique américaine au Vietnam serait un succès.
In Saigon, the word on the street was that a communist assault on the city was not far off. The disintegrating South Vietnamese army shored up Saigon's defenses in a desperate attempt to save the city.
I have a little bicycle and I get on my bicycle and just ride around the city and just experience the panic of people, running around.
Fear and panic are swift-moving emotions. People panicked quickly in other cities like Hue, Da Nang, and Nha Trang. They could panic quickly here if they sensed the North Vietnamese were moving in on Saigon. The difference is, this time, that from Saigon there is no place left to run.
Basically, I cannot think of any way to leave Vietnam. I was 16 and always been sheltered my whole life. My family been taking care of me all this time. And boom, right now they cannot do anything and I feel powerless.
C'était une situation très très angoissante parce que Saigon était menacé de deux événements qui pouvaient être tragiques. D'une part, une anarchie complète avec des bandes de pillards qui auraient assassiné des étrangers, qui auraient pillé. Le deuxième danger, c'était la bataille dans Saigon. Parce que il y restait au moins 200 000 ou 300 000 hommes armés dans Saigon même. Ces gens auraient été plus ou moins obligés de se battre. Et les forces nordistes auraient été obligées de les bombarder. Et Saigon est une ville fragile. Et en plus de ça, physiquement, c'est une ville qui grouillait d'enfants. Ça m'avait frappé. Vous voyez des enfants partout, n'est-ce pas? Parce que c'est le climat, les enfants qui jouaient dans la rue. Alors, l'idée qu'il y aurait, dans cette ville surpeuplée, qu'il y aurait des combats, était une idée à faire frémir.
The deteriorating military situation was too much for Washington. They feared Americans might become trapped in the city. Martin was ordered to begin evacuating Americans and their dependents. Desperate Vietnamese looked for any connection to the Americans to get out. All over the city, quick marriages were arranged.
I remember it very vividly because you had to get married at a police station, and the police stations at the time had concertina wire and sandbags and machine gun nests on the top of them. So you went over there with an American and a Vietnamese witness. You would sign the paperwork. You would pay the person extra money so that they would rush the paperwork through. And we got married.
With an airlift now on, the processing center at the airport became inundated with Vietnamese hoping to get out.
It started off with just dozens, and then became hundreds, and then became thousands of people that were queuing, you know, to get screened, to get interviewed.
It was panicky. The people were apprehensive. The Vietnamese, when we were there, they didn't like to wait in lines very much. So they would push and prod, try to get ahead of the line. When they opened that up, I took my girlfriend and my 3-year-old stepdaughter over there, and it was still a long, drawn-out thing. It was an all-day event.
Patraz was luckier than some. He was spotted by working at the center.
He came up to me and he said, "Sergeant Patraz, there are some no-shows on some of these flights. If you want, I'll see if I could put her on some of these flights." He came up to me and he said, "Okay, she's on the next flight out." He picked up her suitcase, put my little 3-year-old stepdaughter on his back, and he rushed up to the plane and put him on the plane and got him out of there. And he was my hero that day. I'll never forget that.
The process was a little more complicated for those Vietnamese not married to an American.
Each of us had to fill out the application, and the people who have seniority would leave first. I was told that when the time to come, they would come and collect me. Make sure I leave the address and have someone at the time, all the time, so they would come and collect me.
I mean, I actually had a family come in one time, I remember, I think they were Chinese, Vietnamese. There must have been 75, 100 people in this one family. But in the Asian and Vietnamese family context, you know, they didn't make these fine distinctions we made between immediate family and the family. You know, the extended family was all family. There was no such thing as family, non-family, you know, your immediate family and then your distant family. And I mean, this is a Western concept.
I was told I could leave if I would take only 2 younger sister and brother. But I have my family who could just leave your parents, especially in Vietnam, and I was single, so I lived with my parents all my life. I couldn't think of the thought that I would take my 2 youngers and get on the plane and leave Vietnam, not knowing what would happen to my parents, and how could I? So I decided to stay so that I could take all of my family, so they kicked me further down on the list.
Over the next week, thousands of people were flown out of Saigon.
The number of sorties from Saigon to Clark Air Base has soared to 100 a day. It's a 5-hour round trip with the airlift suspended each night. The majority of the evacuees are Americans and their families and dependents. In less than a week, the number of Americans in Vietnam has dropped by more than half to below 3,000.
Nothing is more devastating than you come into work and you know that your boss left and not even a word to say goodbye to you, to tell you I was leaving. And you felt betrayed. You felt betrayed and you resent that kind of treatment. And then two of my co-workers who were there longer than I am just disappear. And you come in and the desk just empty and you have to support consulting them on some of the paperwork and they disappear and they left already. They left last night. And not even a word to say goodbye.
Well, the last few weeks of April, when we find out that the American and all the people that work for them leaving, that make us very resentful and hate them because we always thought that they were going to fight with us to the very end. And you know, for a lot of us, we do believe them. You know, I mean, why not? At that time, we believe America is the most powerful country in the world. And, you know, they can send people to the moon, you know, why not, you know, beat the communists, and or at least, you know, guarantee that they're not, you know, invading us. And yeah, so there's a sense of very strong sense of resentment toward the American. But under all of this is a sense of like, okay, I wish we can go to America, you know, and so it's a very strange feeling for us because we hate them, but yet we want to be like them.
President Thieu appeared on television to address his people. Ambassador Martin had convinced himself that the communists might negotiate if Thieu stepped down. So Martin told him he had to go. Within days of his resignation speech, Thieu had left the country. Saigon was by now almost completely surrounded. The North Vietnamese were waiting on the edge of the city for fresh supplies for the final assault. Saigon was theirs for the taking.
I was 5 and he was 6. We rode on horses made of sticks. I wore black and he wore white. He will always win the fight. Bang, bang. He shut me down, bang, bang, I hit the ground, bang, bang.
At night, the evacuation of Americans and some Vietnamese continued.
My baby shut me down.
At night, that's what the worst part. At night, because I live right near the airport. So I could hear the truck or the bus transporting people who was about to leave, evacuate from Saigon, because they would not move those people during the day, fearing that they would cause chaos in the city. And I could hear the plane taking off, and deep down inside me, it was, it just so, the despair was so great that I cried. At night. I cry a lot at night.
Some who had more intimate connections to the Americans also made it to the airport.
I remember one night we went to one of the bars in Saigon and we loaded up about 10 or 20 young ladies there. And we had vehicles that had light bars and sirens, and we had what we called a war wagon. And we drove up in the dead of the curfew in Tudo Street, opened up the doors, put the girls in, ran lights and sirens, and went right through the gates at Tan Son Nhut, and nobody stopped us.
Some night we don't have electricity, right? So we just have those oil lamp, and I remember the food everything scarce, so we only eat rice mixing with a lot of different kind of grain, and we eat fried peanut. We have peanut and a lot of fried pumpkin. Because pumpkin lasts for a long time, right? The whole family huddle around, and they had this little oil lamp. It's all dark, and we eat our dinner, and we talk, and we get scared. We pray. At that time, I guess the whole South Vietnam assumed that they all get killed. The sense of fear is overwhelming everywhere. We talk about, who get to go and who get to stay. So, yeah, for me, I'm thinking about, go to America many times. I wish I can go. For me at that time, I guess it's the safest place on earth that you can go to. Not only that, it's a place that you can do whatever you want to do. Just the picture, the image of America is like heaven. Yeah.
We still hope that the international community would not drop us. Millions of people who did not like communists. We still believe that there would be some kind of thing work out, so that maybe there was a part of South Vietnam, maybe 1/3 of it, or maybe just Saigon, that we would. There's a place for us. That's what we were hoping. A place for us to live.
A week after Thie's resignation, the North Vietnamese bombed Saigon airport. They were sending a message to the Americans. It's time to leave. South Vietnam's Air Force panicked. Their pilots fled, littering the runway with discarded bombs. With the runway unusable, the fixed-wing airlift had to stop. The only way out was now by helicopter. A secret code was played over the airwaves to signal the beginning of the final evacuation.
Of a white Christmas.
White Christmas, that was the signal for people to assemble, to go to their evacuation assembly points. And so we turned on the radio on that. That was our radio. We turned that on, and it kept playing all day long and all night long, and it was still playing when we were leaving. It kept going. It kept going until somebody turned it off. That was after we left.
Key American personnel were summoned to the embassy.
And when I got to the embassy, I recognized the signs of what must have been evacuation planning. Safes were being blown, papers were being burned. So I walked in, I think it was to Wolf's office, and asked what was going on, and I was told we were evacuating. It was a pretty rapidly unfolding scene. I mean, You know, in some ways it's like watching television. You're sitting at an embassy window watching Augmented Marine Squad coming in on a helicopter. You're nothing but an observer at that time. All the forces at work were, if you will, external forces over which you had no control, authority, responsibility.
As word spread that the Americans were leaving, desperate Vietnamese started to gather outside the gates of the embassy.
At first it was open, the gates were open. Like I said, it was business as usual. Then by about 10 or 11 o'clock, after the Americans started showing up for the evacuation, a lot of the Vietnamese showed up. And we asked our commanders, well, what is the policy here? And they said basically anybody that had an American-issued identification card showing that that person at one time had been an employee, a Vietnamese employee, they would be allowed in with however many people they had. So we started doing that. And then the crowd started getting bigger and bigger. And we couldn't accommodate them that easily. The Vietnamese were so panicky, they were pushing and shoving. And the people in the back were squishing the people up to the front of the gates. It was just impossible to let anybody through at the time. They weren't being organized, they weren't staying in line, they weren't waiting their turn, they were taking cuts and everything. So we just eventually had to close that whole gate.
"800 Americans and thousands of their Vietnamese staff and their families were still in the city. The evacuation plan was that buses would pick them up from pre-arranged evacuation points and take them to the airport. But the airport was surrounded by South Vietnamese soldiers, angry that the Americans were leaving them. One convoy of evacuees was led by Ken Moorfield.
I got back out to the air base, and then I was confronted by the guards. And then there was an officer in charge of the guards. And I kept insisting, you know, we've got to get on the base. I've got these people, we've got an evacuation. He was adamant that we were not going to get on the base, that he had orders that no one was to get on the base. And so finally he got sufficiently angered that he pulled out his pistol and cocked it and pointed at my forehead, and I said, ooh, okay. I think, you know, you got the force majeure here. We'll just go somewhere else. And so I turned around and took the convoy back into Saigon.
Kim was reluctant to go anywhere on that day.
My mother, she kept pushing behind. She said that you have to go to the embassy. But I myself, in my family, was the only one who had link with the American, that I could do something. But I myself at that time, I thought that I already did everything. I submit my application and I'm waiting for my turn, because they were evacuating everybody to leave by their turn. My mother, she kept pushing to say, at least escape for yourself, because you work for the American, they come in, you will have to pay the price. I just say that, let's just wait. And I believe so strongly that the American would never leave us. And that's what the worst part, waiting for it to happen. But you were so helpless. You could not do anything to move people. Your life is at somebody's hand. and your fate is at someone else's hand.
All over the city were Vietnamese who worked for the Americans. They had done as they were told and gathered at the evacuation points. Now they waited for the Americans to do their part. 200 of them had gathered at the U.S. Information Agency, which was headed by Alan Carter.
The next thought was, how do we get them out? The next thought was, get a bus to them if possible. And I remember talking to somebody at Mission Morden who's saying, Alan, we're running out of resources. We have nothing, less and less to work with. The Vietnamese drivers were fleeing, deserting the buses. Other buses were simply breaking down. I realized this was not going to happen. Nobody was going to get over there. I finally got on the phone with one of them and said, the best thing to do, get out of the compound in small groups, 2s and 3s. Get over to my villa, which is closer to the embassy, and which would presumably not be surrounded at that point. The next best and never materialized hope was that some of them would show up at the wall, outside the wall, where the Marines could, if you said, pull some people up over the wall. I went there for a short while, but nobody showed up that I recognized, and in effect kept up a hopeless kind of telephoning around trying to locate our locals. What does it feel like to be abandoned when you're scared to death of what's going to happen the next day when the feared North Vietnamese are going to be there? And to have your American power base disappear without getting you the hell out of there. It's a personal disaster for all of them. I'm not a person given to nightmares. I don't think I've ever had a nightmare in my life until the first 6 months I was back here. I awoke every night, and it was always a nightmare about abandonment. Always.
With the airport surrounded by hostile South Vietnamese soldiers, the only option was to evacuate from the embassy itself. Chinook helicopters began arriving at the embassy to evacuate the 2,000 people who had gathered there. More and more desperate Vietnamese were now turning up at the gates.
When we get to the embassy, we have like a block of people from the fence all the way out. So we're way out here, not even next to the fence. So we wait there for the whole day. Basically, just look up the roof the whole day like that. I just see helicopter go in, well, in and out. Occasionally we look at the gate, we see people like climb up the gate and then get kicked down again and try to get up again. And sometimes we see people with the paper fighting their way through the crowd. We wish we had those people with the paper, right? Tons of people, like a sea of black hair. We just like, standing shoulder to shoulder. Sometimes, just do the shove and then we all kind of, go to one direction to the next. Almost like a rock concert. People stay that close together.
It was getting nasty. And you tried to avoid eye contact because if you looked at them, you would hear the noise level rise. People would start calling your name and say, let me in, that type of stuff. And it was kind of heart-wrenching, It was like they were out there, you knew they were out there, you wish you could help them, like a person drowning, and you couldn't do anything about it. So it got to you a little bit.
In the meantime, helicopters go back and forth, and people just panicking. This is the one hope. It's one spot that they know that somebody escaped, and everybody in that big crowd wish that they are that somebody they're getting, rescued.
Those lucky enough to have made it inside the embassy were flown out to the American fleet waiting out at sea. Desperate South Vietnamese Air Force pilots also headed out there. So many were trying to escape that there was no room for them to land. In the city, busloads of evacuees were now trying to make it to the embassy, but many of them were stuck in the chaos of Saigon.
There were probably 25, 30, 40 people out there in the streets, trying to get on that bus, and at that point it was sheer panic. Kids were being pushed through the windows, it was absolute mayhem. They were paralyzed with fear, they were willing to basically pass their own children to someone on the bus who could get the child out of the country.
Take it easy now, one at a time, no problem. Come on, gents, let's move it.
Trapped in the middle of the city, Moorfield decided to call the embassy to ask where he should go.
One at a time.
He went into a nearby building, only to find hundreds more evacuees waiting to be picked up.
What I found was, several hundred people waiting in the courtyard who had been told that we were going to evacuate them, that we would help them, and they were there waiting. And as I walked in, everyone, who was all seated down, looked up at me, somewhat expectantly, and then I had to walk through them. I think they became aware that I was not looking like I was there to help them. And indeed I wasn't, and I couldn't. So I made my phone call, and then I had to walk back through them on the way out. And I knew I was leaving them, and they knew I was leaving them. And that was the last I was home. I'm sure they never got out. So I recall it was late afternoon, around 5:30, 6 o'clock, when I finally was able to slip into the embassy.
There's a point at which everything just falls apart. But that didn't change the ultimate fact that there were key locals, Vietnamese, to whom a commitment had been made and where we failed in the commitment. Had we moved earlier and started evacuating more of them sooner, we might have gotten more of them out.
Whenever you have a tough situation like this, there are people, who can't hack it. And this criticism, it's all too late, is a bunch of nonsense.
I don't feel vindictive about what happened in the last few hours. Chaos is chaos, and there's not much you can do about it. But everything leading up to the chaos is where my anger still surfaces about it, and my feelings about it. because much more should have been done by then.
If we did anything that would create a panic, then we wouldn't have been able to do any of that. So I totally reject that criticism. I think even most of those who made it at the time don't make it anymore. If they still do, they're utterly mistaken. They understand nothing.
As night fell, the evacuation intensified. At its height, the helicopter was touching down every 10 minutes.
The helicopters would usually hold maybe 38 Marines, combat loaded. We were putting 60 or 70 Vietnamese in these helicopters. We were just packing them in as quickly as we could. We did that from like 3 in the afternoon till maybe 4 in the morning. All afternoon, all night long. And it was just a steady stream. There were a lot of panicky people, and we were trying to keep them calm, trying to assure them that, yes, there was a steady stream of helicopters coming. Eventually you would get in line, and eventually you would get out. You just had to be a little patient.
The Vietnamese who hadn't made it inside the gate watched from the outside.
We were hoping for a miracle, that they would open all the gate and the big chopper would come down and pick everyone up. Which kind of foolish. Anybody in a clear mind would see that right away. But at that time, like I tell you, we all live in panic, so we don't see that. We don't see clear. So we still had that hope, because that's the only thing we have. So we wait for 6, 7 hours straight, right there, without moving an inch, until reality hit it.
Realizing he was never going to make it into the embassy, Long made his way home through the streets of Saigon.
So we make our way back to the car. The car was totally stripped. The wheel come off already, the window broken, the radio is gone, even the seat is gone. And then so we had to think about how to get there to our house. The plan is to survive the trip home. You see people looting everywhere, gunfire. You know, anybody with a gun can, rob you at any time you want to. Yeah, there's a lot of burning. There's a lot of smell burning through in the air. And it's dark. You don't see anything. So you're kind of guessing your way. You run this direction, that direction. So our concern is to survive that night.
After several hours, Long made it back to his family's house on the outskirts of the city.
We wait. Just wait there, and then slowly people come home and we're a bit happier. And finally, all our family make it home. At least, safe for one night. And we're very happy that we're all safe. Whoever can sleep, sleep, and whoever cannot sleep, just sit up and talk the whole night. And lucky for us, we still have some rice and some pumpkin and some peanut. Yeah. We're one of the lucky family. We still have food.
Ambassador Martin was trying to keep the evacuation going as long as possible, to save the maximum number of Vietnamese. Washington wanted to end the evacuation as quickly as they could. Martin was told there would be only 19 more helicopters. He was ordered to get the rest of the Americans out, and leave everyone else behind.
You know, it was clear that the end was coming within hours. So at 4 o'clock in the morning, the ambassador and I went to the communications station in the embassy, and we wrote right there, and the communicator was typing out the message on the machine, sent our last message, which said, plan to close embassy at about 4:30 local time. Due to the necessity to destroy the communications gear, this will be the last message from Embassy Saigon. At about 4:30, a very peremptory order came in starting from the White House in Washington that the ambassador and the remaining staff are to leave in the next helicopters.
I said, Ambassador, they're saying that you have to be on this helicopter, and he kind of looked at me dispassionately.
And the ambassador had these cool blue eyes, and he looked down at me, and I had a bayonet on the end of my rifle. And he says, oh, well, it's coming to that now. And I said, yes, sir, it is. And he was just very cool and very quiet. He wasn't ruffled at all, still in his business suit, still in his business attire.
He didn't put up any resistance, so I took him by the arm and, helped him get across this parapet. He was carrying his dog, this little poodle, and so I took him by the arm and make sure he didn't blow away, as we made our way onto this helicopter, and took him over and helped lift him up into it. And the other officers, 3 or 4 of them followed, and that was it. I just told the pilot that you've got the ambassador. And they left.
All the American civilians were now out. Only the Marines were left. Hundreds of Vietnamese were left behind inside the embassy compound.
I felt maybe mad at the ambassador for not starting soon enough or getting enough of the people out earlier. I think there was a lot of resentment there at that time.
With the ambassador gone, the Marines headed for the roof, from where they would be picked up by helicopter. They were followed by desperate Vietnamese, still hoping to be taken out.
We barricaded the building on the first floor, and there were gates on every floor of the stairwell. We locked all of the stairwells. Well, in about 5 minutes, some of the Vietnamese had broken through the doors. They had taken one of the fire trucks that we had there at night. They took those vehicles and they smashed through the doors of the embassy. At the top stairwell, we barricaded it with foot lockers. And then every once in a while we would throw a little can of CS gas or something to try to clear the stairwell, and we just kept that barricaded up. Some of the people in the stairwells were crying for us. They were holding their hands up and like praying to us to let them in, and we just couldn't let them in. There just wasn't any room for them. We got on the roof and we stayed on the roof, and then we were waiting for our helicopters, and nothing happened. We didn't have any guarantee that we were going to be rescued or the helicopters were going to come for us. We had plenty of ammunition. We had all of our rifles. If we had to do whatever we had to do, we had the equipment, we had the machine guns, we had the power to fight if we had to. But we were all just dead tired. We had been up all night evacuating people. We were just very physically exhausted at that time. We sat there for about 2 hours, and then the sun started coming up. It got eerily quiet, very, very quiet. It was like a quiet before a storm.
Down in the city, people prepared for the arrival of the North Vietnamese. They did all they could to cover up their links with the Americans.
My mother, she went into my room. She goes through all of my belongings, clothing, suitcase, and pictures. She took them out and burned them. She burned anything that have the labels in English. All of the pictures that I wear miniskirt in the 60s and the 70s. She burned them all. My high heels, she burned. And the next thing I knew, I jumped in and I tried to choke her neck to kill her. And I say, Mommy, Mommy, this is mine. This is my clothes, what I'm going to wear. And this is mine because those are mine. Those are my identity. Those are my past. It's me. She burned and she kept crying. She say, they will come in, they find these things, they will kill you. They will kill you. I have to destroy them. And here I am choking her to death to stop her. It's just reactionary, and I hated her. I hated her until the day I left Vietnam. I didn't even talk to her.
The city was full of rumors about ways to get out. Thousands gathered at the docks in a frantic final bid to escape before the arrival of the North Vietnamese.
We get to the boat, get on the plank that connect to the boat, and we climb up from the ground to the boat. And the boat getting very crowded. And we find out that the boat actually cannot move because the engine not working. But we're not going to give up. We stay there anyway. And someone actually take the plank off the boat, so nobody else can get on the boat. So people still try to get on the boat by, throwing rope over or swim over and climb up. And then we wait on the boat until something happens. We're just hoping that they can fix the boat.
The Marines had now been waiting for 2 hours on the roof of the embassy for their helicopters to arrive. All they could do was watch the chaos below.
People were looting and carrying on, and it was just like the end of civilization. It was a free-for-all. See people that had been in an organized society literally driving away American vehicles and looting American buildings and taking American furniture and running through the streets. I had never experienced that before.
At 7:46 a.m., the helicopters finally arrived to take Patras and his fellow Marines out of the embassy. They were the last Americans to leave Vietnam. Three hours later, the North Vietnamese troops rolled into the heart of the city. The most lurid rumors about these troops turned out to be false. They didn't pull women's fingernails out or bury people up to their necks. But they did send thousands of South Vietnamese who had worked with the Americans to re-education camps.
I remember being in 6th grade, 11 years old, and watching the war on television. And it just felt surreal that here I was 10 years later, witnessing the death of a nation.
My own feeling of that was a mix. It was a mix of sadness and a good deal of anger that we, the United States, had come this road and ended our Vietnam commitment and engagement in this way.
A 20-year attempt to build a nation in South Vietnam had ended in humiliation for the Americans and personal disaster for those they left behind. Some believe the lessons of that experiment have now been forgotten.
Trying to grow a democracy in the midst of chaos and in the context of an historical culture and society is as foolish now as it was then. So there's an American messianic quality at work again, as it was then. It leads us to believe that we can go around creating our own image, recreating our own image. I'm, as you can tell, highly cynical about that.
After 3 days at sea, Long and the others on his boat were picked up by a cargo ship. He eventually made it to the US. It was another 11 years before he was reunited with his family.
If someone give me a pill for me to forget all of this, I won't take it. Because I guess, you don't like the experience when you're in it, but after you survive it, after you experience the experience, it gives you so much.
Kim was arrested for collaborating with the Americans and spent 2 years in a re-education camp. On her release, she bought a small boat and escaped Vietnam on her own, also ending up in America. She was never to see her mother again.
I felt I was betrayed. I felt that they left me to die, as I left me in my country to die. That's how I felt it. It was not only betrayed, I felt betrayed, but I felt in anger. The anger that was so great that I still feel it today. I still feel it today.